Hey there. In today's workshop, our training, it's not really a workshop, but it's this month's training. I want to talk with y'all about the reasons why and how to create a new collection of artwork. You've likely heard before the advice that in order to have your work, to take your work to a professional level, you really need to create a consistent body of art, consistent body of work. And there's a lot of truth in that advice. In this training, I'm going to talk about first what a collection or series is and how they're different. 3 reasons why you should work in a series or in collections, why you should take advantage of those. The top mistakes that I see people make as they're trying to do that, and there's some biggies, and then how you can quickly come up with ideas for your next series or collection. And also how you can go about finding one that you really want to work with for a while, one that you can hold on to and dig into, that's deep enough that you're not going to get burned out or bored with it rapidly. Also, just a few ways you can go from one idea to the next in a really normal and natural way. So if you do this, if you follow my advice, I kind of promise you, you're not ever going to really not know what to paint next. You'll always have this bank of ideas behind you that will feed what you're doing and help you grow your art and your art business. So let's get started. Number 1, the first thing that I want to talk about is what exactly is a collection? What's a collection or series, and what's the difference? Those words get used a lot interchangeably at this point in time, but you may not have heard some of them used in this context before. You've probably heard series. A series is a group of related artworks. It's what people usually default to when they're thinking about that consistent body of work. And they are usually connected by subject or theme. It can be almost any loose connection between the thing that you're painting, the subject matter, and the content or the feeling that you're trying to create, i.e. the theme. Now, at this point, I want you to remember, don't overthink this. I've got some steps for you to work through as we go through the training later, but for right now, don't start letting those engines rev and you think too much about this. So a series is a group of related artworks that are connected by subject or theme. A collection is a curated selection of artworks. So let me repeat that. A collection is a curated selection of artworks. And they're also connected. See how similar the words are? They're connected by subject, theme, medium, or approach. It's a little bit broader than a series at times. It can be considered a little bit broader. A portfolio might be another word that you've heard used at one time or another. And a portfolio generally means a selection of an artist's best work. Sometimes people use that for the whole entire collection of work an artist has ever done. It's their entire portfolio. Don't get too hung up on what the words mean. Keep in mind that what you're trying to do is create that consistent body of work. And here's why. Here's why that is important. I've got 3 main things for you to think about. If you create that consistent body of work, if you're working in a series or a collection, around a series or a collection, then you're going to, without really even trying, further develop your style. Style happens when you dig in deep and you focus in tight on an idea, and when you work consistently over time. So it's about going deep rather than going broad and wide. That will naturally happen when you're working towards a series or a collection because you've created a framework within which to work. Don't think of it as being boxed in, but think of it as a very flexible container that you're working within. It gives you a space. If you don't have a box at all, you don't have any space to find. And it's very uncomfortable as a human being to be functioning or trying to move around in a space that doesn't have any boundaries. It makes you feel like you're going to fall. So think of working in a series or creating a collection as a way of giving yourself some parameters that are guidelines that keep you focused, but still can be pretty flexible. Second thing that working in a series or a collection can do for you is it will help you develop an audience. A lot of people want to wait around until they get the consistent body of work before they start building an audience. But you can start building that audience as soon as you're starting to create. And the more consistent the work is that you share with that audience, the more that audience is going to grow, because you have an alignment between the things that you love and are passionate about and the things that they love and are passionate about. When that alignment happens, you get a synergistic kind of energy that builds, and your audience will grow at a much faster rate. So you'll develop a style, you'll develop an audience. And this last reason, it's really one of the most important. It's the real external one. So those first two things are kind of internal. You'll create your own style, you begin to develop an audience. Well, here's the third one is about marketing. It becomes a whole lot easier to share a consistent message about your work when you're working consistently. It's easier to share a consistent message about your work when you're working consistently. So it makes it a whole lot easier to promote and sell your work when you can talk about it more deeply and more effectively. When you're working in a series or a collection, it's not that hard to come up with the stories around the work, to come up with the context that you want to share with your audience. And your audience will ask questions, and that will help you build that context and that marketing message in an even more strong way. That's what I call organic marketing. It's the kind of an organic messaging. It's the kind that develops really naturally through the process of the way you're working. And it doesn't feel awkward when you do it that way. So those three things again are, and I'll put them down to one word each: style, audience, and marketing or messaging. All three things become so much easier when you're that consistently focused on an idea. So the biggest mistakes that I see people make as they're beginning to work on developing their style is that they become too rigid. And I've taught this for decades. It was the capstone experience for the seniors at the college when I was still teaching. And they had to go through the same process that I'm talking about here. And what they tended to go to almost by default was a really rigid, artificial kind of constraint. And I want to warn you against doing that. And here's what I mean by that. They would narrow down the things that were going to be similar to the point that the box was tight and they didn't have any room to move. They would try to narrow it down to everything's going to be the exact same size. I'm going to use the same colors in each of the paintings. I'm going to frame each one of them the exact same way. They're all going to have human beings standing in the middle. They're all going to deal with saving the world and ending child hunger, and that is too much to put on a body of artwork. So don't become too rigid and don't try to pile too much on at one time. Let a lot of the consistency develop naturally. I like to think about if you can come up with 3, maybe 4 things that are going to tie it all together. And that will help you be consistent. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I'm warning you, please do not become too rigid. I would rather see you err on the side of being a little loosey-goosey rather than being too rigid. Because what will happen if you go too rigid is that you'll choke up. You'll become blocked. You won't feel like painting because it'll feel like you've got a set of orders that you have to march by. And very few of us like to paint that way. So don't become too rigid. The opposite of that is to become too loose, loosey-goosey. And I don't think that is as bad as being too rigid. But because if you're looser in your structure, you can, if you are still producing enough, you can begin to pull together the threads through looking at the work. But it helps to be tight enough, but not too tight. So try to avoid being too loosey-goosey. Don't just say, this series is going to be a series of landscapes. I'm going to make a series of portraits. This is a collection of still life paintings. That's too loose. That's not creating or painting a picture in people's heads. And it's probably going to leave you without enough of a focus as you move through those paintings. So this is not just about what you're going to talk to other people about. It's about creating a project framework that helps you focus without tying you down too tightly. So don't be too rigid and don't be too loose. Now, the third thing, and this is one that I see a lot of people do, is that they don't do what I call R&D, basically research. They don't do enough research collecting, and they don't do enough journaling in their sketchbook or just making notes in their sketchbook, so that when they have to start talking about that body of work or that series, they don't have anything to go back to, and they don't remember the thoughts that were running through their head as they got started on it. Here's what I do, and here is what I've seen successful people do who are working towards making a collection or a series, is that they begin by just collecting together things around the topic or the subject. So they'll collect all the photographs that they've got, for example, around the idea of a place. So I've got 3 folders right now in my photographs folder, my reference photo folder, around 3 different places that I've been painting for the last 2 years. Each one of those is a series in and of itself. Together, because there's some common threads through all 3, they become a larger body of work right there. But I can think of them individually. And I have collected not just my own photographs, but I've collected anything that's connected to it. Looking at other web pages, looking at stories about those places, not just ones written by me, but thinking about stories other people have told. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be something you've read. It can just be something that becomes part or is part of the overall culture. Pull together into a folder all the related and connected things that you can think of. For one thing, it'll help you with that writing part later, because there's always going to come a moment, I hope, for everybody where you're going to need to write a little statement or a paragraph, or you're going to need to write some stories to promote your work, or you're going to need to write an artist statement if you're going to have an exhibition in a gallery, whether it's online or in person. If you've collected and kept that sort of stash of references and influences, it is so easy to go back and then write something about it that makes some sense and gives people a framework to look at your work through. So start collecting stuff. So those 3 things are people who are being way too rigid and in coming up with their idea, being way too loose, being loosey-goosey, and not collecting references, influences, and inspiration. All of those things are important. If you can even start sticking up some of the things that are inspiring you about that idea in your studio, it's going to help in feeding the imagination. So think of all those things as the stuff that feeds your imagination and your creativity. So then the next thing I want you to think about, oops, I went the wrong direction there. There we go. How you can quickly come up with ideas. So that is one of the questions that I get a lot from especially young artists. And it definitely was the one that my students at the college would wrestle with at the beginning. It was the place where they would get bogged down. And they were overthinking it hugely. They would want to default to the great ideas, is what I would call them. They would want to expose the crisis of homelessness, end child poverty, transform systems. And that's too big. It's biting off too much. And it's actually something that is so big that it's hard to contextualize it in the framework of, say, 8 to 10 paintings. So don't try to impose this huge, big, life-changing, earth-shattering thing onto your paintings. Instead, let it develop naturally and organically. And here's how you go about doing that. Look at images of your past work. And the way that I like to tell people to do that is to look at them in thumbnail scale. And here's what I mean by that, is it go into either your folder on your computer of your artwork, and instead of looking at it as a list, look at it as icons from the icon view so that you can actually see the image. If you're on Photos, if you've got the Photos app, open that up and look at all of the images as little tiny thumbnails. So look at the images of your past work in thumbnail view. And what happens when you look at them small like that is that you can begin to look for similarities in subjects, compositions, materials, and technique. Look for what you're already doing that's connected, and let your new series come from where you already are. So look for those similarities, and then on a piece of paper, in your sketchbook ideally, list 5 things that show up consistently in what you've done. It could be color relationships. It could be the types of subjects. Get as tight on that as you can. It could be types of compositions. It could be materials or techniques that show up over and over and over again. Make a list of 5 of those. Then look at that list and strike off the things that are not ones you want to hold on to. We've all done work in the past that we might be a little tired of, and we're ready to move on to something different. So as you're looking at that, if there's a subject on there that you don't want to pursue anymore, cross through it so that you're left with 2 or 3 things that are really important to you. Now you've got a list of where you're coming from. Next, I want you to make, this is number 2, make a list of subjects that you enjoy working with. And brainstorm at first. You can list as many as 5 or 10. Just write down as many subjects as you can think of that you really enjoy working with. They don't have to be earth-shattering. Remember, we're not trying to save the world one painting at a time. Through the whole body of paintings, we're going to do it one painting at a time, because you do it by touching one person at a time. But make that bigger brainstorming list and do the same thing we did before. Now narrow it down to 1 or 2 things that you want to explore for your next series. You don't have to limit yourself to just one. I really like working on 2 series at a time. It keeps me from getting bored. So limit it to like 1 or 2, 3 at the most, but that's beginning to push it. Keep it tight. Not so tight that you feel boxed in, but keep it tight. If you begin to feel boxed in as you're working, you can always expand out a little bit. So now that you've got the subject matter, I want you to think about what approach or style, what method do you want to use in creating the work? What style do you want to paint in? Have you been working in a more impressionist style? Do you want to become a little bit more expressionist? So impressionist tends to be dealing with color and light in an optical fashion, in a loose manner as that light falls across the subject matter. Expressionism, on the other hand, means that you're beginning to use color symbolically to stand for emotions. But think about what approach you want to take. Narrow it down to 1. Try to keep it limited. Try not to pop all over the place on the style that you're using. Remember that style, in your particular personal style, will develop over time, but it develops through focus. So pick one of those and think about 4 styles in general. There are a lot of other styles, but I just want you to think about 4 right now. Realism. And that, I mean more highly realistic than I paint. Realism. Then think about impressionism. I talked about what that is just a minute ago. Think about expressionism or expressionistic work. It's where you're letting the color and the mark making be a little bit more symbolic for feelings. Then think about non-objective or abstract work. Which one of those are you going to work within? Doesn't mean you can't ever do the others later, but it means for this series or collection, you're going to focus in on one. Pick one. Now, the last thing I want to focus on here is you got to get started. Don't wait around for the perfect idea. Just pick one and get going. Look back at your answers to the questions that I've asked you here. And you can download a PDF right below that has all of these in here so that you can go through them and write your answers down. But also feel free to put them into your sketchbook if that feels more normal and natural to you. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk to you a little bit about how you would, how you can go about coming up with an idea that is going to sustain you over a prolonged period of time. Because if you're not careful, if you're narrowing it down too much, you're going to work through that idea really quickly, and you might even get a little bored with it. Here's what I found works really, really well, and it's so much easier than overthinking it. It's really similar to the idea of looking back at where your work has been in order to decide where you're going to go. The best way to find an idea that is going to be one you can dive into for a long period of time is to follow your curiosity. Have you heard me say that before? Where your curiosity goes is going to lead you to something that will hold your attention longer. So don't try to impose an idea from outside. Instead, follow what you're curious about. If you're really curious about insect life, I've got a friend who is fascinated by ants. If he was going to start a series of paintings or drawings right now, I would tell him he needed to be working on ants because he can tell you more than you ever wanted to know about ants. He lives, breathes ants right now for whatever reason. So follow your curiosity. If you've become obsessed with gardening, make your paintings about gardening, what it is that you're growing, whether it's flowers or vegetables. Follow your curiosity. If you're thinking, I wonder why, it's a clue. So follow your curiosity, and it will keep leading you to the next subject, the next medium that you need to explore, the next big thing. That's the way to be able to grow your series and your collections very organically, so that you're not trying to artificially come up with something and becoming too rigid. It's one of the best ways I know to not become too rigid. So let's talk about some concrete steps for actually working through that series. So you've developed your idea. You've gone through those 4 steps that I gave you for developing your idea. Here's how you're going to plan that series out. Number 1, batch your subject matter. So if you're working from a series of photographs of a particular place, put them all together in a folder on your computer. If you're going to be painting fruit or vegetables from life, go buy a whole lot of them and take good photographs of them. Doesn't mean you have to work from photographs. You can work from life, but you want to identify which things you're going to work from. So in other words, get your subject matter together and make it available. Put those fruits and vegetables into your fridge so you've got them ready to work from when you want to get started. Work out some ideas in your sketchbook. Do some planning. Get your thumbnails going. Y'all know I preach about thumbnails and notans. Work out some of your ideas ahead of time. I'm a big proponent of batching. Batching helps you stay in that series collection frame of mind. Think about some consistency in size. That doesn't mean they have to be exactly the same size, but that the sizes are connected or related to the subjects, or that they're not all over the place, but they're within a small range there. Think about similar surfaces or formats. Don't be too rigid. Err on the side of being a little looser on that. Another thing that I do when I'm working on a series, as I said before, is to work on more than one painting at a time. I've probably got 4 right here going right now. That'll keep you from getting bored, getting tired, and wanting to go to something totally different. So work on more than one piece at a time. And last but not least, work consistently. Not everybody can work every day, but work consistently so that over time you'll build up a bigger body of work. When you do that, you're able to act as your own gallery and curator, select from your series to curate a collection that you can present on your website and on social media. It allows you to become the curator, the gallerist, as well as the artist. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'm really looking forward to hearing y'all's ideas about what you would like to work on as a series, how this connects, if you're already working in a series or in collections, to what you already do. Drop any of those ideas or hints into the comments, and I look forward to talking with y'all about that more as we hop on live over the next coming weeks. Bye-bye for now.